Okay, chapter 24 then, Herr Bonsack. Let's get stuck into this. Another name chapter, the chapter with a name of a person, gives that more narrative progression as we're used to. We know we're going to meet Herr Bonsack, and we can't wait to meet Herr Bonsack, can we? What a name.
I walk around to pick up my last Stasi man. In his street, new tram lines are being laid. Lengths of steel are strewn like licorice down the median strip.
Oh, tram lines. Don't talk to me about tram lines. Tram lines.
It's lunchtime and the workers are nowhere to be seen. I ring the buzzer where it says Bonsack. A man comes out putting on a smart tan overcoat. He's tall and slightly stooped, thick-set through the chest. His face is pleasant, with receding hair and full cheeks. He looks me straight in the eye and smiles a warm smile.
So, we've got a description again of, this time, Bonsack. And, well, in fact, before that, we've got the new tram lines being laid. I got distracted by the word tram lines there. I had some sort of Pavlovian response to that. Lengths of steel are strewn like licorice down the median strip. So that's similarly there, describing something sort of industrial and the infrastructure of the city and comparing it to licorice. Why? I don't know, really. I mean, it just makes it sort of describes it in a way that is more familiar, I suppose, and quite simplistic, isn't it? I suppose. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something more profound to say, but there's not really anything more profound to say, I think, for that one. I think it just is, she's describing something functional and utilitarian as something, decadent and like a sweet. Anyway, that's enough rambling. What about Bonsack? A man comes out putting on a smart tan overcoat. He's tall and slightly stooped. So always undermining. Tall and slightly stooped, thick set through the chest. In other words, heavy set and sort of overweight. His face is pleasant with receding hair and full cheeks. He looks me straight in the eye and smiles a warm smile. So actually, for Funda, this is fairly positive, really. Although we tend to find that she's more positive, I think, for male characters. I think, is that fair to say? It tends to be the female characters that get more the brunt of her unflattering descriptions, particularly where makeup's concerned, I think. But that might be just the way I've sort of read this. But that's the feeling I get. I'd have to reread it, which I'm not going to do, to sort of prove that. But that's the impression I've had anyway.
Let's go to my local, he says. The pub is a traditional Berlin Kneipe. It has a bar in dark wood with mirrors behind it, booth seats and lacy white curtains to shield people from the street. A shaft of light slips past them on an angle, slow afternoon light of lazy particles and beams. Two regulars watch their glasses. There are little pubs like this in both East and West Berlin, where everyone knows everyone else. I've occasionally walked in for directions or cigarettes, and each time I felt I had walked into someone's living room uninvited. When a stranger enters, the hum of conversation breaks while people look up and hunch their shoulders. Here, though, when the regulars see Herr Bonsack, they nod. The publican smiles like a brother. "How are we?" he asks, rubbing his hands together. "What'll it be today, then?" "We might go into the side room," Herr Bonsack says, "if that's all right, for a chat." Of course, of course." He shuffles out from behind the bar in his socks and slippers and shows us in. There are old advertisements for beer on the walls, pictures of glowing-cheeked maidens and horses and hops. I look at Herr Bonsack. In the light from the windows at his back, he seems to have a bit of a glow about him, too. "What can I get for the lady and the gentleman?" "I'll have a wheat beer and a corn," he says. "And you?" It's early. I order a beer and forego the schnapps. Günther Bonsack's voice is deep and slightly slurred, like a person with ill-fitting crowns or a man who has been drinking.
Okay, so the description is less flattering now, isn't it? So his voice is deep and slightly slurred, like a person with ill-fitting crowns. What a brilliant description. Fantastic simile. As if someone's, got badly fitted dental work, or a man who has been drinking. Well, I mean, that's particularly fitting for the semantic field here of alcohol, isn't it? So much so that he's drinking, having beer and schnapps, a schnapps chaser on the side. So there's a theme here, isn't there, of these heavy drinkers that she seems to be meeting. And we wonder, I think, if this is to sort of, have they turned to alcoholism because of their past, because of their history with the Stasi, or is it simply the culture? I think we're perhaps invited to think that it's because of their involvement with the Stasi.
His eyes are bright and he is relaxed with me. He is not, as it turns out, a man with anything to prove. He is 57 years old and the only Stasi man I have ever met who outed himself. A lieutenant colonel, he worked in one of the most secret divisions of the overseas spy service, the Hauptverwaltung Aufklärung, HVA. Herr Bonsack was in Division X, responsible, as he put it on the phone to me, for disinformation and psychological warfare against the West.
So she uses the German there, the Hauptverwaltung Aufklärung, to sort of immerse us in the language and give us that authenticity, which sometimes we lack, don't we? Because when we get the dialogue that we've had here with the publican and smiling and talking, we're given the translation, and actually sometimes we have to remind ourselves that that's not quite what was said. It will have been in German, not in English. But sometimes she does give us the German, and that gives us that greater sense of authenticity. But she always gives us the parentheses to either define the word or give us the acronym, which she has done here for HVA.
The HVA was the overseas espionage service of the Stasi. Its director, Markus Wolf, the son of a Jewish doctor and playwright, is intelligent and urbane, and was the model, apparently, for John le Carré's spy master, Carla.
Did you like the way I set that up then, with a little bit of anadiplosis with the HVA? That was almost intentional, wasn't it? Just backing up a little bit, the bureaucratic language then of disinformation, psychological warfare against the West. This is the sort of bureaucratic lexis used by the Stasi, not by Funder. This is just her quoting what was said, but it's interesting that she chooses to use those, given the very, we know, mechanical and bureaucratic nature of the Stasi.
Wolf's HVA was subject to its minister, Milke, but Wolf and his men always saw themselves as a breed apart. Although they were organised according to military rank like the rest of the firm, they wore suits instead of uniforms, were highly educated, and enjoyed a privileged existence. "Because we were responsible for the West," Herr Bonsack explained to me, "we could travel, and we were quite different. Our diplomats could speak languages and were cultivated. We all scorned Milke. We had our Wolf, the tall, slim, elegant intellectual." Herr Bonsack trained as a journalist and worked for 26 years in disinformation. Much of Division X's work was directed against West Germany. It collected sensitive or secret information from agents in the West and leaked it to cause harm. It manufactured documents and spliced together recordings of conversations that never took place in order to damage persons in the public sphere. And it spread rumours about people in the West, including the devastating rumour that someone worked for them. Division X men fed coups to Western journalists about the Nazi past of West German politicians. Several major figures were brought down this way. It funded left-wing publications, and it managed, at least in one instance, to exert an extraordinary influence over the political process in West Germany itself.
So the asyndetic list of things that the Ministry for Disinformation, is that what it's called? I've lost it. Yeah, Division X. I'm trying to find the quote. The HVA. The asyndetic list there, showing the range and the breadth of what they actually did. It's horrific, isn't it? I mean, it's just mind-boggling, the fact that people spent their careers doing this stuff, and it's so wrong, isn't it? Just so, well, it's mind-boggling, and you wonder how people could live with themselves. Well, clearly they struggle to. Many use alcohol, it seems, but what a bizarre way to live your life, and I don't know, but it's bizarre.
In 1972, the Social Democrat head of the West German government, Willy Brandt, faced a vote of no confidence in Parliament. Division X bribed one and possibly two backbenchers for their votes in order to keep him in power. Colonel Rolf Wagenbrecht, the head of Division X, described its work simply as an attempt to turn the wheels of history.
What a powerful metaphor that is. Again, not Funder's words, but Colonel Rolf Wagenbrecht has said here that's an attempt to turn the wheels of history. What a strange euphemism there, really, isn't it? Again, we can't credit Funder, but it's just interesting how words are used to manipulate, attempt to turn the wheels of history, or to misturn the wheels of history, or to skew the wheels of history. It's just, it's fascinating.
Herr Bonsack starts with a joke. He told it at lunch back in 1980 to a group of his colleagues at the restaurant reserved for the highest ranks of the Stasi. He leans back and smiles like an uncle with a secret.
Ah, look at that. What a lovely simile. like an uncle with a secret. It's quite. I mean, that's what's called a familial simile, because she's drawing on the idea of family members, and particularly sort of an avuncular image of an uncle, an avuncular uncle, we tend to think of as being sort of, you know, friendly and cheerful and a bit mischievous. So yeah, it's a very, very familiar human simile to use, which Funda tends to do, doesn't she? Always brings things back to the human, back to the sort of, not so much family every time, but we've certainly seen humanity used a lot, and it seems that she's using that again here.
The USA, the Soviet Union and the GDR want to raise the Titanic, he says, lifting his eyebrows. The USA wants the jewels presumed to be in the safe. He nods. The Soviets are after the state-of-the-art technology. And the GDR, he downs his corn for dramatic pause. The GDR wants the band that played as it went down. So
we've seen it before, I mention every time, with the likes of Julia and Frau Paul and all the other people she's met. We get brought back to the present with something they're doing. And with Herr Bonsack, what's called Gunter, he puts down his schnapps for effect. So we're brought back to this almost cinematic style of cutting back to the person speaking, and the way in which he puts down his drink for dramatic effect before he reveals this extended metaphor of wanting the band that played on the Titanic. You know, the GDR wanting everything, even what seemed like the most good, innocent, good-natured aspects of life.
We laugh. Was it normal to tell jokes like that? I ask. Yes, he says. Quite normal, but it depended who was there. As soon as I told that one, I thought, oh brother, that was a bit foolish of me because there was a general at the table. He runs a hand over his head. After lunch, the general took me aside and said in a quiet voice, next time, Bonsack, I wouldn't tell a joke like that. And that was way back in 1980. They were sensitive about the whole thing going down, even then. Were there Milka jokes? Yes, lots, he says. But the worst Milka ones weren't jokes. They were true. Herr Bonsack was invited to the party the Stasi threw for themselves and their Russian comrades to celebrate the 40 years of the GDR. It was the 3rd of October 1989, the height of the demonstrations and unrest. There were about 2,000 people at the party, he says. Milka made his entrance. He raises one arm behind his ear and does a 2-fingered walk through the air. Down some stairs in the corner, surrounded by his generals. Like a ghost or the god in the machine. Milka made a speech. For 4 hours he spoke on and on. Every now and then he gave a rallying cry. And just remember, comrades, this one thing, the most important thing you have, is power. Hang on to power at all costs. Without it, you are nothing. He didn't mention the democracy demonstrations and the fact that the Soviets were backing away from us, Herr Bonsack says. But it was clear he must, at some level, have felt the end coming. When Milka finally finished, there was a banquet. There were grapes and chicken drumsticks and melon and stone fruits, things that we never had in the GDR and that were truly exquisite, amazing delicacies to us. But just as they were about to tuck in, Milka would quickly pick up the microphone to say a few more idiotic words, and everyone would have to put their drumsticks and bunches of grapes back down on their plates until he was done. He would finish up by saying, "Guten Appetit," and the men would start to eat. But moments later, he'd grab the microphone again, and they would have to put it all down once more. It went on and on, Herr Bonsack says. The whole occasion was insane. At Christmas 1989, from his telling of it, events bloomed into full-scale, fast-forward farce. Herr Bonsack.
The time marker there at the start of the paragraph, so within this anecdote and within Bonsack's narrative, we've got the chronology that takes us through, as we've had with everybody else. She's sequenced this. Whether or not the interviews took place in this order, I think it's unlikely, but Funda has sequenced them in this way to give us that chronology within each particular anecdote, so relative to its own timeline.
The entire division was ordered to stay at home so as not to provoke the demonstrators and to be near the phone. At 3 a.m. they would receive a call ordering them to drive to Normannenstrasse, parking some way away so the demonstrators wouldn't know the buildings were occupied, and to enter by a rear door. When they reached their offices, all the lights would be out. They were ordered to don camouflage combat gear, like the Foreign Legion in the jungle, and then to kit themselves out with cooking equipment and cutlery, a spade, a protective suit in the event of chemical warfare, a blanket, toothpaste and brush, and ammunition. They were each issued with a pistol and a machine gun. The whole operation was timed.
So this is mainly Funder's own phrasing, isn't it, and words here, and she's using an asyndetic list, presumably to echo what Bonsack has told her the employees needed to have, but it seems quite an overwhelming list of things. It seems unnecessary. It seems an awful lot of things that they're told to wear and to have. But that's like the Stasi all around, isn't it? They're sort of overdoing everything, and that represents their style of being very heavy-handed.
What would you do then? I ask.
We'd lie down on our desks and sleep. The generals upstairs on the 9th floor were simulating a war situation. One would come down and wake us up with a message, say, an American sub had been sighted off Turkey, or the American B-52s are on standby. Then at 5 a.m. we'd get worse news, maybe that a Russian sub had been taken off Norway. They were pretending World War III had broken out.
What could you do?
Nothing. We slept some more.
At 7 a.m. they would get an order to go into the field.
We'd play war for a day, stand around and shoot the cardboard figures that popped up out of the grass.
Everyone was there, highly intelligent specialists who could speak Arabic and goodness knows what, and we were all reduced to playing soldiers. By the end of 1989, they were doing this every single week. And we knew the GDR was lost, he says, so it was a circus. Herr Bonsack's greatest fear was that he and the others would be ordered to shoot the demonstrators outside their building. During the exercises, they were told that the enemy had infiltrated the country and was inciting the East Germans against them. At the end, Milke was more direct. He told them that they, he meant the people, were the enemy. He said, "It's them or us."
For me, Bonsack says, that was the most terrifying thing. That instead of shooting cardboard figures, we'd have to shoot our own people. And we knew, just like under Hitler, that if we refused, we'd be taken off and shot ourselves.
There was another fear too. Milke had also told his men, if we lose, they'll string us all up. The atmosphere was hysterical. Herr Bonsack had been Marcus Wolf's contact man between the Stasi and the secret services in Hungary, Moscow, Prague and Warsaw.
Our man in Budapest had told me that in the drama of 56, his people were hanged in the trees outside their offices. He said to me, if someone points you out, 5 minutes later you'll be swinging.
Herr Bonsack runs his hand over his head again.
Thank God it didn't come to that, he says.
He explains that by the time the demonstrators really got going in Berlin, and it was later there than in Leipzig and elsewhere, Milke had already stood down. And he had been there so long the generals simply did not know how to give any orders on their own. They could not seize control.
And this is what saved us, Bonsack says, shaking his large head. Us and the people.
Somehow, back in September, it became clear to Herr Bonsack that the files would have to be destroyed. He told his bosses he was going to start shredding.
It is not allowed, the boss said. There is no order to do so. But, Herr Bonsack says, I just drove my car into the yard and got the files out of the filing cabinets. There were meters and meters of them. Agents' key files, films, reports, and I drove to our garden 100 kilometers away from Berlin.
The family had an old baker's oven on its holiday plot, and then,
totally privately and personally, without any permission and without any command, he says, I destroyed everything, all day long.
There was so much paper to burn the oven nearly collapsed. A cloud of black smoke hung over him in the sky. Herr Bonsack stood there for 3 days, feeding the files into the fire.
Interesting there that when it comes back to Funder's narrative and the way she phrases things, as opposed to Bonsack's narrative, it becomes figurative. And so he stood there for 3 days, feeding the files into the fire. And even, I mean, that metaphor feeding, of course, but also the fricatives there of feeding and files and fire just makes that phrase stand out. So interesting that Funder herself can't resist making something figurative and personifying the fire as destroying the files.
The weak afternoon light is fading, and the publican comes in to turn on some lamps. He is a man of Herr Bonsack's age, with a ravaged face, red hands, and a tea towel tucked into his apron.
Everything all right here? He asks.
Herr Bonsack orders another beer, another corn, and a coffee. I say I'm fine for the moment. Herr Bonsack smiles gently at me.
You know?
He says.
You are utterly without need?
I glimpse beneath the genial drinker a man who was the match of anyone, east or west. Herr Bonsack wanted to stop his files getting into the wrong hands. They concerned the Western agents he ran, West German citizens who did things for the Stasi.
In my section, he says, they were all journalists. We used them to start scandals or break open political cover-ups. We funded them and we fed them scoops.
The smoke attracted attention. Bonsack's neighbour in the country, he says, was a hopeless soak.
But of course even he had a suspicion about where I worked. We call it the Stahlgeruch, the smell of the sty. He used to lean over the fence and slur abuse at me, old shiny bum, and SED, and all kinds of insults. He was there again, drunk as usual, while I was burning it all up, and as the smoke passed over his house, he began singing the anthem of the citizens' rights movement. Wir sind das Volk. He knew exactly what I was doing. It was grotesque, really, Bonsack chuckles. His aria to accompany my burning pyre.
I look at Herr Bonsack in all his clever dishevelment. A strand of his hair has left the rest and sticks out at an angle above his ear. He tilts his head back to drain his shot glass again. His neck is ringed and ridged, the Adam's apple moving up and down like a mouse on a ladder.
Lovely. Nice simile, isn't it? Again, taking someone's physical appearance and sort of, I don't know, making it seem ridiculous, up and down like a mouse on a ladder. That's not an image I can really easily conjure up, really, a mouse on a ladder going up and down. But I think that's the point, isn't it? To make it unfamiliar and to make us sort of think of it in a different way and think of the description of him in a different way. And this draining his shot glass again. I mean, we're getting the picture of a hardened drinker, and she makes reference to that she's a man who could match anyone east or west at drinking. So there's clearly a real desire and a need to sort of self-medicate, I think, in meeting him. And that's a thing we found with other Stasi men that she's spoken to as well.
Herr Bonsack looks around him.
Here, he says, I was always a regular. I had my spot at the bar. I've lived around the corner for 38 years. Before 1989, I was always just, Günther, hello, how's it going? People didn't know what I did, but of course they had their suspicions. Sometimes I'd come straight from work with a tie and a stylish overcoat with a briefcase, and there'd be a rumble through the pub of, doesn't he look fine? They would have a sniff as much as to say something's not quite right here.
He pinches his nose between forefinger and thumb.
The wall fell on the 9th of November, 1989. The first time I came in here afterwards, I think it was the 15th.
He pauses, takes a drink and a breath.
A drunken man was at the front bar, and when he saw me, he swiveled around slowly, pointed at me and screamed, Stasi, out!
Just before we get too much further there, you'll have noticed a bit of zeugma there. He pauses, takes a drink and a breath. So that verb takes being used for two different things there. One, obviously, self-medicating. One is sort of decadence and luxury to an extent. And one is obviously, very human and necessary. So she's blending those two things, possibly to heighten the drinking, I would say. Whereas, breathing is essential. The drinking is clearly optional, but used very much to self-medicate.
Everyone shut up and turned to have a look at me. They all thought the same as he, or at least half of them. I couldn't move. I said to the publican, what do they want from me? I said, I can't stand here before you all and undo it, take it all back. After that, I sat down. I drank a beer and I just sat there.
He draws his lips into a line and holds his hands out as if to say, what could I do? Herr Bonsack kept coming back. It took nearly 3 years until no one was aggressive anymore.
But there were no hangings or attempts or anything. In fact, I was relieved, really, that the people reacted so sensibly.
But the drinkers were not the only public. Herr Bonsack got wind that a magazine, Die Linke, had managed to obtain a disc containing the names of the top-paid 20,000 Stasi employees and was about to publish it. He knew everyone would read it, find his name and address on the list, and feel whatever they would feel, contempt, hatred, or self-righteousness. He knew there was only one thing for him to do.
I would out myself before I was outed.
He called Der Spiegel, the famous West German news magazine, and arranged to tell them everything.
I really pulled my pants down, as they say, he says. When I got the edition in my hand, I felt sick. There was a photo and everything. I mean, when you were silent and you lie for 26 years, and then all of a sudden you see yourself in a magazine, it was really... He pauses again. I have to say it was a bit strange for me here.
He pats his heart. Hardly any of his former colleagues will talk about what they used to do. It is almost a sort of omerta, a code of honour that rules them. He tells me that they still meet in groups according to rank or at birthdays and funerals. A general who remains on speaking terms with him told him that at a recent 70th birthday, proceedings were run like a divisional meeting from the old days. There was an agenda, and the men went through it item by item. It consisted mainly of passing around clippings or reporting on television programs against the Stasi. It was as if the old Stasi leaders here have now found a new enemy, the media. And Herr Bonsack is a traitor because he went to them with his story. After he outed himself, he got death threats over the phone.
"You arsehole, how low can you go?"
And these sorts of things, he says. The calls were anonymous, but sometimes he recognised the voice.
A general rang him up from a pub. He said, "You motherfucker, that's enough, your time will come." Then he started screaming, stop it, until people took him away from the phone.
The calls have stopped now.
I was never frightened, Bonsack says. I mean, I used to check my car to see if it had been tampered with, but there's not much point doing that because if they're any good, they do it so as you can't tell.
I ask him who his friends are now.
Well, I have none, he says, nodding to the publican for more.
He looks at me with shiny, anaesthetised eyes.
I've fallen between two stools, you might say.
At 3 a.m. there's a phone call. This time it's not Klaus, it's home. They have found 4 tumours in my young mother's head, secondaries from a cancer we had all dared to hope was gone. She says on the phone, "Je suis foutu, je suis foutu." Later, what they did to her affected, for a time, her speech. And she, a woman of such elegant and slicing language, but at that moment only the French would do, and she knew she was foutu. Uwe is, unsurprisingly, all kindness. He helps me pack at the apartment, gathering up books and tapes and stray socks covered in dust. I'm grateful for his sympathy, and more for the way he ignores, at the right moments, my distress.
"We'll take you to the airport if you like," he says.
"Thank you." All my reactions feel unreal, slow and underwater. We?
Frederica and me. You know Frederica, from the Spanish translation section?
Yes, I lie. I call Miriam, but I know that it's a formality. I'm not even hoping that I'll get a live voice on the line. "Hi, Miriam. I hope you're well. We seem to be missing each other a lot. My time here is up, and I'm going home." It strikes me suddenly as obscene to be saying that my time is up. I think of saying, "I'll be back," but that might be the last thing she wants to hear. The tape is rolling. It'll stretch my silence to an embarrassing length. I like to say something casual and ironic to cover things here, but my German doesn't reliably stretch to irony. I am forced to say things in a much more direct and heartfelt manner than I would in English. "Miriam, look after yourself," I say, "and good luck." The morning I leave, I try again and the phone rings out. The answering machine isn't even connected anymore. When they come to collect me, I do recognise Frederica. She is a beautiful Venezuelan with a mole at the corner of her mouth, and together she and Uwe are electric. He drives calmly to Tegel, solicitous of a world that has finally looked after him. It took 9 months for my mother to die, and each day except for the last 3, she was conscious. Conscious that the days were, as they say, numbered, and that the number was not a big one. And the feeling of being robbed of all the things you were going to do in the future, but seeing at the same time that they were not important. It was simply the future itself, a bigger number, that was. After she died, grief came down on me like a cage. It was another 18 months before I could focus on anything outside an immediate small area of sadness, or could imagine myself into anyone else's life. All up, it was nearly 3 years before I came back to Berlin.
Okay, so just rounding off then with Funda's own personal life sort of intruding into the narrative at this point, and it gives us a pause and gives her a pause, I suppose, to reflect on what she's heard and what the research she's done. Just a few language points there. Towards the end of that chapter, there's anadiplosis there as the word conscious. For the last 3, she was conscious, then full stop, and then conscious that the days were, as they say, numbered. So it's personal, but it's crafted. So it's a glimpse into her own life, a rare glimpse into her own life, actually, in this book. Possibly one of the first, actually, and certainly the most sustained in the book. And yet here Funda's probably at her most crafted, I would say. And maybe that's to sort of hedge her own personal grief and her own persona from the reader, possibly. there's a slight distancing, I think, here that might be, for that reason. And then in that last paragraph, after she died, grief came down on me like a cage. That simile again there, and it's understandable. Another 18 months before I could focus on anything outside an immediate small area of sadness. And nearly 3 years before I came back to Berlin. So we know there's a gap, a time gap here. And then, of course, in the next chapter 25, we get the date of spring 2000. So we know in this chronology that time has elapsed. And so that's it for this chapter. So you'll hear me again for chapter 25. We're almost there.